We're gonna make it look fly with some DIY. We're gonna make it look fly with some DIY. We're gonna make it look fly with some DIY. Uh-oh, thrift diving.
Hey, what's up? It's Serena Apia from ThriftDiving.com, which is a podcast, a blog, and a YouTube channel that helps you decorate, improve, and maintain your home using paint, power tools, and thrift stores without sacrificing your budget, the environment, or style. Welcome to episode 22, or is it 23? I've lost track, but one thing I do know is that I am here. It is Friday. I'm actually recording this Friday morning. It's 6:37 in the morning. It has been a super busy week, and suddenly, when you've got all these obligations, all these things that you've scheduled yourself for, and things aren't just falling into place, like you have to shift things around and get up an extra hour earlier. Well, that's what I'm doing today for today's podcast. I've been working on this project. It's for Arrow Fastener, and I'm making this huge pegboard. It's like 4x8. It's a huge sheet of pegboard, and I'm painting it, I'm stenciling it. And so today we're going to talk about stencils. Last week I thought, maybe we'd talk about battery versus gas, but I was like, who really wants to talk about that? That's not fun. And I usually like to tie the Friday podcast to what it is that I'm working on. And because I'm working on this project, it's kind of been taking a lot of time, but it's not a difficult project, but it is involved. I mean, when you're stenciling, it takes some time to make sure that you're getting clean lines. And I figured, why don't we talk about stenciling today? How to use stencils and how to clean them, and how do you get good results when you're stenciling? What can you stencil on? So we're going to talk about that today. And I will also include down below in the section with the description and the notes and all of that, the show notes, I'm going to give you the link to where I love to buy my stencils. I've been using these stencils for probably the last 5 years, and they're a little pricey, but you can use them over and over and over and over again. But it also depends on how you clean them, because if you don't clean them properly, then it becomes a little harder to get clean lines. Now, one thing you'll notice in this podcast episode, I am not going to be editing a lot of stuff. So if you hear me say and ah, I think you're just going to have to accept it and overlook it. I'll tell you why I'm moving so quickly this morning is because, so I've been working on this project all day, like in the last few days, actually. And when I saw my mom last weekend, she said, when are you going to come up so you can paint my desk? And I kept remembering oh, wait a minute. That's right. I got to paint my mother's desk. Oh, that's right. I got to paint my mother's desk. But then I kept forgetting. As soon as, how the thought comes into your mind and then you just kind of forget, you get busy. So she reminded me just yesterday, she said, you are still going to come up and paint my desk tomorrow, which is Friday. And because I've been so busy and I'm not done this project that I'm working on with this painted, stenciled pegboard, I said, we're going to have to delay till Sunday, Mom. Can we do that? And she said, yeah, no problem. But I felt so guilty. I kept putting her off. And I don't know about you guys. I don't know how old you are, you listening here, but I'm 43. My mom is 65. And I feel guilty about putting her off because I'm one of those people, even though I would consider myself to be someone who always looks on the bright side. I'm not pessimistic. I'm pretty optimistic. I always think, what if something happens to her? And I know that's a morbid thought. I'm not trying to make this morbid, but you would feel very guilty, Serena, if something happens and you kept putting your mother off and putting her off. And it's one of those reminders that, and also for you too, if there's someone that you have been putting off and maybe it's your spouse, they've been wanting to do something together and you're like, yeah, but I've got these things I got to do. I got to work. Don't let work be the reason why you tell family no. Work is so important. And let me tell you how important this project is that I'm working on. So one of my sponsors, Arrow Fastener, they're amazing. Every year they come to me and they say, hey, we want to do some projects with you. And as a blogger, as a YouTuber, that is amazing when you have a brand that comes to you and say, hey, we want to do 4 projects this year with you. Because then that means you've got money coming in consistently, and you've got a brand that loves what you do, and that's great for the ego, it's great for the pockets, it's great for you because you're using these products anyway, and you're telling your audience about products that you love and use anyway. So it's just all around a great deal. But because I get so busy, and I've been doing this with Arrow Fastener, and I feel so guilty, is I'll say to them up front, okay, I'll have projects in, let's say, March, June, September, and December, or whatever. I'll kind of space it out there, maybe one per quarter or whatever. And I've been telling them every single project, like the last 4 or 5 projects I've done with them, oh, I'll have it for you on this day. And then that day comes up, and then, no, suddenly I don't have it. I'll have it for you next week. So with this project with the frame pegboard that I'm stenciling, I told them I'd have it June 25th. Well, remember, I was working on my closet, and you remember how behemoth of a project that was. That really, that pushed everything back. So as June 25th came, I kind of forgot that I had to do this project. And then June 28th, I get an email from them, hey, just checking on you to see where this project is. And I'm like, oh, shoot, that's right. I'm late on that. That's what I'm supposed to be working on now that the closet's done. So I dropped everything. Well, didn't drop everything. I was really recovering from doing the closet, right? It's very hard to jump from one project to the next, like the very next day. You need that downtime in order to shift gears and think about what's coming next. So anyway, that's what I've been working on. And then last week I told them, I'll have it for you like 4th of July weekend. And then, of course, it's 4th of July weekend. Who's working? Who's doing projects 4th of July weekend? You're spending time with family. And my son's birthday was July 5th. He turned 15. And so then that kind of delayed too. So then I sent them an email. I said, I'll have it by Wednesday, which was Wednesday of this week. Well, Wednesday comes. I didn't post anything. And they emailed me the next day. Hey, did we miss your project? Did you post it? Oh, no, I think I'll have it by today. Well, that was Thursday. That was yesterday. And here it is Friday morning, and I still don't have it. So you can imagine how stressed I was when I'm thinking, I've got to get this project done. And my mother is wanting me to come on Friday. And then I think I've got some plans for tomorrow. And then my best friend on Sunday, she wanted me to do something with her. But also we were going to go skating. So I told her, I sent her an email yesterday, hey, guess what? I can't do Sunday. So I started pushing everything back, and I had rescheduled my mom for Sunday. And I just felt really guilty. And I don't know if you feel like this, but one thing that I did not want to let slide is this podcast, which is why I said, I'm not even going to edit it. So if you hear me stumbling over my words, guess what? Sorry. This is this is what a very busy person does. They cut corners. And so this is me cutting corners by leaving in all of my errors. Because a lot of times with these podcasts, if I say if there's a long pause, I will take it out. And it takes a long time. I'll spend hours going through editing it so that it becomes a better listening experience for you. See, I would have taken that out. But we're not going to do that today. We're just going to jump into it. And we're talking about stencils. And I wanted to just talk about a few things about stencils, why you should consider stencils if you've never used them before. There are some people who may have never used stencils. There are some people, some crafty people that have used them, but they've only used them in certain ways. Like, for example, maybe they've stenciled the front of a box or something small. But there's so many things that you can do with stencils. And I just wanted to go through first the 5 reasons why I think you need stencils in your life, because I just think stencils are amazing. And one of the reasons is because a lot of times when you're doing furniture painting, I think sometimes just painting something a different color can be boring. It could totally transform a room. Don't get me wrong. However, I do think that when you add something else, just a little bit of something else to it, it gives it that oomph. And for me, that's always been stencils. So for example, there is one favorite stencil that I absolutely love. And they're from it's from a company called Royal Design Studios. Is it Royal Design Studios? Yeah, it's Royal Design Studios. Years ago, they sent me a free sample of a stencil. They said, pick whatever stencil you want. It was like $60, which is kind of expensive, but it's one of those huge hanging, well, I say hanging because you can do your walls and everything with it. But it's huge. I want to say it's probably 2 feet by 3 feet. And when you go to Michael's or AC Moore, any of those places, it's very difficult to find a nice stencil. They've got some kind of generic ones. They may have some larger ones, but there's kind of a limited selection. So, and that's the case many a times when you go to a store and you're looking for something specific, they just don't have it. So when Royal Design Studios had reached out to me, I said, oh, you know what? I really love this French floral damask stencil. Go ahead and send that to me. And I ended up using that thing on at least 5, 6, 7 projects, and I still have it. So $60 is kind of expensive, but considering all the projects I've done with it, it's been worth it. So one of the things that I like to tell people, there's my timer telling me that I need to move on to the next thing. Remember, in one of my previous podcasts, I did tell you I use timers. I'm telling you, that's how I try to manage my time and, not get caught up on Facebook. But the reason why I love stencils is because it can take something that's so boring, just a regular piece of painted furniture, and make it look fabulous. So what I like to do is I'll take a dresser, and let's say you're painting this dresser white, but you've got some other accents in your room. You can use your stencils, pull your drawers out, and put the stencils on the drawers and just stencil with an alternate color over top of those drawers. So when you push them back in, it just makes it look so much more finished. It just gives it a different appearance that you wouldn't have gotten if you had just used one solid color. So down below, I'm going to leave the link for how to use stencils, and these projects and these examples, they're all there for you. So again, that's the first reason why I think you should be using stencils, because it makes plain things look fabulous. Another reason is because you can use them 10,000 times. Well, maybe not 10,000, that is stretching the truth. But like I mentioned, I've used them for multiple projects and they've never torn. Now, one problem that you will have with stencils, we'll talk a little bit about this in just a moment, but when you've used them over and over and over, if you're not cleaning them in between, they get really gunky with just paint and over paint. And when that happens, you're now sort of messing up that stencil, because you're not going to get as nice and crisp of an edge as if that stencil was cleaned properly in between, or if it was brand new. So you'll notice when you get a stencil, and I'm sure if you've done some stenciling, you've noticed this. When you do it the first time, it's crisp, it's clean. Second, third time, still clean, but now you start seeing that paint seeping up underneath, and now it's starting to look like it's blurred, bleeding lines. So we will talk about cleaning the stencil, but if you're cleaning it properly, you can use the stencil over and over and over. So that's why I tell people, if a stencil is $60, it's kind of expensive, yes, but think of all the projects that you're going to be able to do with it. One of my favorite projects that I'd use this French damask stencil for was my laundry room table. I found this table from the thrift store. It was exactly what I was looking for. It was like $30, and it was one of those tables that if you had split it apart, it would have had a leaf for the middle. Well, the leaf was nowhere to be found, and I figured I don't need it for that. Let's just take it, $30. It's a good deal at the thrift store. So I separated the pieces, and then I mounted them up onto the wall. So really what I did was I took a table, cut it in half, quote unquote cut, separated it, and then mounted it to the table side by side to the wall. And it created this nice long folding table for my laundry room. And it cost $30. But I didn't just want to paint it, I actually stenciled it. So I did this gorgeous light gray. I think it was an Annie Sloan Paris gray, which looks amazing with the white. If you've never used that combination, definitely use it on something. And then I stenciled with the white over top of the gray, and it looks amazing. I think at this point, I probably need to redo it because, my kids, they were sitting there for virtual learning. There's markers all over the table now. Yes, I just got to redo it. But it looked good. So yes, you can use those stencils over and over and over. And another reason is stencils can allow you to be fickle. And the reason I say that is because when you're using stencils and let's say you're doing a dresser, right? No one said that you have to keep it like that. When you're done with that look and maybe you want to change your room around, you can definitely sand that down and then do a whole new look, right? You're not married to that look. And the same can be true for the other reason which I tend to call this reason number one, is because wallpaper sucks. And if you have stencils, you can actually get pretty creative on your walls and not feel like you're investing a lot of money because wallpaper is much more expensive. This is actually reason number 4. Wallpaper is much more expensive and stencils you can do, it just takes a little bit, well, I say it takes a little bit more time. Depending on the size of your room, it can take more time. But if you ever want to change it up, you're much more likely to change up a stenciled wall than you are a wallpapered wall. Now, I will tell you, here's the thing though, when you wallpaper, yes, pulling it down can suck unless you have the removable wallpaper, but you are going to have to do some things in order to prep that wall if it's been stenciled. So think about this, when you stencil, that little bit of paint that you're putting on top of your base paint, right? So you're taking your brush and you're going over the stencil, maybe let's say twice. That's creating a little lip right along that stencil, which means your walls are textured. So when you're stenciling, your stenciling is actually textured. So if you were to go to my powder room, right? So several years ago, I used a stencil in there. It did very, very well on YouTube. People loved it. But if you touch over the wall, you do feel that it's got a little bit of a texture to it because of the stencil. So just keep in mind that even though stencils aren't permanent, you are going to probably have to take an orbital sander and knock that down a little bit so that now you've got an even surface. Or if you've got a lot of texture there because of the stencil, you might have to do what's called a skim coat. And that's where you take a little bit of joint compound. It's the stuff that's used for drywalling. And you take one of those long, I call it a putty knife, but yeah, I guess a putty knife. And you're actually just skim coating it along the wall, filling in those gaps and those edges. Now, I've not actually changed my stenciling in the bathroom since I did it. So I can't walk you through that process to say, yes, this is how long it took me to sand. It was a pain in the butt. I'll never stencil a wall again. But eventually, I probably will change it and I'll be able to speak to that. But that's just to give you a heads up that, yes, wallpaper can suck when you put it up there and it's hard to remove depending on what you're using. But also stenciling walls can be a little bit of, while it's not permanent, you will have to do some sanding to make sure that it's a nice smooth surface. And I remember a friend of mine, she actually stenciled her dining room. Hey, Jody. Not sure if Jody's listening, but she had that same thing where she had to kind of sand the walls down a little bit because you could see where that stencil was when she was ready to repaint it. So just keep that in mind when you're using stencils. But I love stencils. And so I think those are 4 reasons. And I think the 5th reason is it's just a really great way to accent. Actually, this kind of speaks to the other reason that I told you, that you can make plain things look fabulous. But think about the other places where you can actually add some contrast or highlight. You can also do your floors. There are people who are stenciling floors, yes. And I've never done that, but you can do that, and that's a great way. In fact, I don't know if she listens to this podcast, but there's one of my readers. Her name is escaping me right now, but she did a kitchen makeover and just used a really inexpensive stencil. And her kitchen, I don't believe her kitchen was very big. It was one of those kind of small boxy kitchens. So it didn't take much time to stencil the floor, but it looked amazing. And you would think that she had paid for these like expensive stones or whatever, but no, it was just stencils. So that's reason number 5, is that you can use stencils to accent your walls, your fabric. Yes, you can stencil fabric, your floors. And also several years ago when I was making over my master bathroom, I actually used a stencil on just like one of the flat parts of the vanity. And it was just a really simple stencil. You can see it in the blog post, but it looked great. It looked great. And it was just enough to give it a little bit of personality, but it wasn't overwhelming. The way sometimes stencils can be if you're stenciling a huge area. Okay, so those are the 5 reasons why you should be using stencils and some of the places that you can use them. So let's talk about prepping for stencils. I'm taking a drink of water right now. Remember, we're not editing this, so you're going to get it all today. Okay, so prepping for stencils. How do you actually use stencils? Well, the first step I consider to be finding the right stencils. And again, remember I said when you go to Michael's, AC Moore, some of these places, you can find stencils. Their selection has improved. However, some of the more modern, cool stencils, I feel like they have more generic ones. So I will leave the link down below. Cutting Edge Stencils is another place where I've gotten stencils. I'll leave an affiliate link down below for them as well for the Royal Design Studios. But I've gotten at least, I want to say 2 or 3 stencils from Royal Design Studios. In fact, that's one of the ones that I'm using for this large pegboard. I ordered it, more than a year ago because I liked it. It was this pretty little floral one, and I ordered it and I said, I don't know what I'm going to use this for, but when I need it, it's going to be here. Sure enough, this was like the perfect project. So find the right stencils. Sometimes if you buy cheap stencils, they don't clean up well and they don't last as long as a more expensive one. So just keep that in mind. Spend the money because you will be able to use it over and over and over. So then the step 2 that I usually tell people to think about is finding the right thing to stencil, because some projects are easier to stencil than others. And the main thing is that you want to be able to lay your stencil flat. And this is what can be difficult because sometimes with walls, you want to make sure that you're starting evenly, right? But if you're doing drawers, stenciling around inside corners can be difficult. So that's why for me, if I'm doing drawers, it's got to be a flat drawer. It can't be a drawer that has any sort of nooks or crannies. It can't be where I'm like stenciling inside of a drawer. That's very difficult. And in fact, when I was doing the stenciling in the bathroom, I found it very difficult to stencil inside the corners of the walls. And some people just said, I don't know why you felt like you had to do that because it looked fine if you didn't stencil the corners. I thought it looked weird. So just think about where you're placing your stencil. Just take it, lie it down, or is it lay it down? Lay it down on whatever it is that you want to stencil and make sure that you can reach all the surfaces. If there's any places where it's bunching up or leaving gaps, think about how you might be able to tape this down and just make sure that nothing moves. That's how you get good, clean lines, because once things start shifting around, that's when it's going to start looking not quite so good. And I can tell you, if you have a stencil that has a lot of things going on, it's a busy pattern, it's more forgiving. So if it shifts around a little bit, the eye is not going to notice. But in my bathroom, that stencil was not busy. So if any little bit of shifting happens when you're doing stencils and it's not a busy pattern, the eye is going to be drawn to that. So just keep that in mind. Depending on where you're stenciling, do you need to have a little bit of forgiveness or does it need to be exact and precise? That's one thing to keep in mind. All right, step number 3 is getting the right accessories. So here are the things that I usually tell people to get when they're stenciling. So flat paint is definitely going to be a little easier because it dries faster. So if you're stenciling on walls, maybe you might want to do you might have a satin as your base, but I would say for walls, try to stick to flat paint because it dries faster and it's going to create less opportunity for that paint to bleed. This is if you're doing walls. Furniture, I like to use chalk paint and, really any kind of furniture paint is going to work. And there is a post I will leave down below. It's the 12 best furniture paints. But honestly, there's so many furniture paints out there. A lot of them work well, but these are the ones that I have worked with that have a pretty good reputation. So if you're looking for different types of chalk paint, furniture paints, you can find that down below. Of course, you need the stencils. Now, you might want to consider a spray adhesive. This works really good when you're stenciling on fabrics because that tends to be a little bit more slippery. On walls and furniture, you can use a spray adhesive, but I probably would stay away from that and I would just use painter's tape or they've actually make something called stencil tape. So you can use that as well. So again, make sure you have the painter's tape or stencil tape, and you want to use a small foam roller. Don't get one of the rollers that has the little fuzz, the fuzzy rollers. Don't use those. Foam rollers are good because it's going to apply it on a smooth surface, but it's not going to leave that, how do you say it, like that napped look from using the brush rollers. So small foam roller. Stencil brushes are pretty good too, although if you're doing a huge surface, you're not going to want to use a stencil brush. That's going to take forever. So like, for example, when I did the framed pegboard, I used a small stencil roller and just made sure, I was very careful to not get any paint underneath of the stencil. And also small paint brushes. If you need to go over, once you lift it up and you need to go over any areas, use a small paintbrush and just fill in, where those need to be filled in. Okay, so just thinking in terms of what designs you can stencil. So remember, you can do words and quotes. If you are using a Cricut maker or one of the Cricut machines, you can actually make your own stencils out of vinyl. And I love to do this because not only can you make huge, you've seen these walls on Pinterest, right? Where people are doing like these huge quotes, or it's big. It's like, you're like, where did you buy that from to make that stencil? Well, you can actually print it out on a Cricut. And I've never done it before, but you can do it. You can print oversized. It's just a matter of printing sections at a time, and then you got to put it all together. But think about words and quotes that you want to stencil. Sometimes if you're buying stencils that are just individual letters, you might spell something out. Although I think that would be a little bit more time consuming. But think about words and quotes. In fact, when I did my kids' bathroom makeover years ago, I did a navigational theme, and it was so cute. I stenciled the words north, east, west, and south on the existing vanity doors. But I made it a little cool because I took arrows. So where it says north, the last part of the H, there was an arrow pointing up. And then for east, the top part of the T, there was an arrow facing east. So it was really cool. If you look at the blog post, you can see a picture of it. But think about words, think about quotes, think about stenciling your external doors. So I did mine. It says there's no place like home in a really beautiful cursive print. And I think I did use the Cricut for that. I did use a Cricut for that. And one thing I like about the Cricut is that because it's vinyl and you're making your own stencils, you get such a crisp line. You won't get as crisp of a line if you're using like regular, stencils that were cut out of plastic that you just buy. But if you make your own with a Cricut, I can guarantee you those are so smooth. Those are the best kind of stencils. But not everybody can afford to get a Cricut or some of those other vinyl cutting machines. And also too, think about fun images and shapes that you can stencil. So when my youngest was maybe 2 years old, actually, I think he was younger than 2, I found this really cute wooden thrifted place ink and decided that I was going to refinish it and turn it into this what does it look like? It's like navy blue, like a nautical theme. And on the front, I had created my own stencils and I created this sailor's hook. It was like an anchor. I created an anchor and painted it. So think about fun images and different shapes that you can stencil onto different places or furniture around your home. And then of course, patterns and designs. For me, I love floral. I don't know what it is about florals. For some reason, when I was a kid, I was a huge tomboy. But over the years, I became more girly. I just love anything with flowers and floral patterns and, pinks and purples and blues. It's crazy. I don't know. Maybe it was always there and I just needed the right time in my life to unleash it. But anyway, these are very popular styles. You can find them anywhere. So damask patterns, florals, there's modern patterns. Really, there's anything. So just think about what you like and invest in a good one that you'll be able to use over and over and over. Okay, so just in terms of how you use them, when you're stenciling walls, you generally want to start in a corner or start in one place where it's going to be pretty much a right even angle. And then you'll start there. And one thing that you'll notice about large patterns, these large stencils, is that they have, and I don't know what you call them, but they have little parts where you can actually realign them. So remember, when you're doing a large space, let's say a wall or a piece of furniture, most time that stencil is going to have to be moved, right? So once you paint, let's say you're doing a wall and you've got it tucked up there in the corner, and once you've painted that section, you've got to pick that stencil up and move it to the next side, right? You can either go up or you can go down. And they have little reference points on that stencil that you match up. So it's kind of hard to explain in a podcast, but just imagine that when you're picking this up and you're laying it down, you need to have a reference point to make sure that this thing is going to line up. And you'll see them, and I will actually leave a link to a video where I did a table, and you'll see me pointing out these reference points. So keep in mind that when you're moving this, that's what you're going to do. You're going to use these reference points, and that's how people are able to do these large stenciled projects and have it look straight and even. So plan where you're going to start, and then of course you're going to use the tape for step 2. You're going to use spray adhesive or you're going to use tape, but I typically like the idea of using tape. Spray adhesive is good, if you're doing fabric and that's shifting around. I would stick to using tape. And then when you're loading your brush, your stencil brush or your roller, you want to load this paint very, very lightly to the point of where you're barely putting any paint on this foam roller. Now let's just I'm going to assume that you're going to use a foam roller, right? Stencil brush is good if you're doing small little areas. But generally, if you're doing, I want to say dresser drawers, or you're doing dresser tops, walls, you're going to use a foam roller. So I'm going to tell you, load it very, very carefully. Because think about it, if you overload your roller brush, all of that excess paint is going to go right underneath of that stencil. And when that goes underneath that stencil, it's going to give, it's just not going to look good. It's going to give you a messy look. So what I tell people is load it very lightly, and you can always go over it. Even after like you do one pass over, without even moving it, you can just load a little bit more paint and go over it again, right? So you're doing 2 coats and you're not necessarily letting it dry, but you're just making sure that you're not overloading that roller. You don't want to do that, because it will start to bleed through and it will not look good. And cleaning that up would be a mess. Okay, so for step 4, this is where I was talking about repeating your stencil pattern. So when you're moving your stencil to a new section, you're going to match up the stencil with the repeats. So they call them repeats, I believe. I call them reference points, but it gives you an idea of where that stencil should be placed so that everything's going to line up evenly. And in the blog post, there are pictures so you can see what I'm talking about. And remember, if you need to, like once you pull that stencil off, if you need to do some small brushes in order to reach certain areas or to clean things up, don't be afraid to do that. When I was doing my bathroom, I needed to stencil right over top of the door. And there was only about, I'm looking at it now, and there was only about a 3-inch section, not even that. There was no way I was going to be able to get a roller up there. So I actually had to take out the small brushes and just do those by hand. So depending on the areas that you're stenciling, you might have to do that. And also too, don't try to get it perfect, because I will tell you, even under the most perfect circumstances, you will have a little bit of bleeding. You will have spaces where maybe the paint wasn't dark enough and you're like, well, maybe I should go over it again. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just remember, the more detailed a stencil you have, the more give that you'll have for mistakes. But if you're doing a stencil where, there's not much to it, people's eyes are going to be drawn to those lines. So just keep in mind how perfect you want to be, and pick your pattern based on, how much wiggle room do I need here for mistakes? All right, so just buying the stencils, I have a couple of options. Royal Design Studio, again, is where my favorites come from. And in fact, there's two that I bought there. So I already told you about the floral damask stencil. The one that I used in my bathroom is called the Mansion House Grill stencil. And I will leave that down below. That's one of my favorites. I mean, it's beautiful. The stencils are a little larger. And again, because of that, I had to be a little bit more precise. So I remember when I was finishing up that design, I was going in with just this little paintbrush and I'm filling things in. And it got to the point where I was like, okay, Serena, enough. Like, you're not going to be able to get this thing perfect. Another place to purchase from is Cutting Edge Stencils. I don't think I've actually ordered from Cutting Edge Stencils before, but I know I do have an affiliate link, and I know sometimes people do order from them. I would say they are competitors with Royal Design Studio, and they're I think what they're offering is a little different. They've got some really cool ones there too. So they've got some things that Royal Design Studio doesn't have. So definitely check them out. Again, check out the craft stores, Amazon. You can actually buy some of the Cutting Edge stencils on Amazon. I'm not sure if you can get them, everything from Amazon, but you can check and I will leave them down below. And again, another option is cutting your own. So you can use a Cricut. You can use a Silhouette Cameo. I think I've got both. I don't use the Silhouette as much as I used to. I actually use the Cricut more than, and even that I don't use that often. But whenever I make my own stencils, I definitely use the Cricut and vinyl. Yeah. All right. So you can actually use an old school stencil cutter. So I actually bought this for a friend one year for her birthday, for her 40th birthday. So you can cut your own stencils. Again, it's probably not going to be as exact as some of the other ones, but it is an option, and I will leave some links down below to where you can order those materials. And also you can buy stencils from Etsy. So people could be making their own stencils. You can get some custom stencils. In fact, there's a company that reached out to me, and I cannot remember their name. I will leave a link down below. And you can order custom stencils from them. So I had them do a custom thrift diving stencil. It's small. It's like a probably 12-inch. It's not very big. But yeah, like if you've got certain words or certain things, maybe your last name that you want stenciled, you can actually order from companies that will directly ship it to you, or even, order something from Etsy where somebody can do a custom one for you. All right, so let's talk about washing your stencils. This is the part that I absolutely hate about using stencils. And even just the other day when I was stenciling onto this pegboard, this was the part that I hated, was trying to clean this up. And even in the blog post, I tell you, this is the part that I hate the most about using reusable stencils, because it gets really, really messy very quickly. And if you're using chalk paint, which chalk paint I think is a little bit hardier, it sticks to everything. That's even harder to get out than regular latex paint. So here's what I would tell you. If you're washing when you're washing your stencils, when you're done, you want to clean them immediately with warm, soapy water. And in fact, when I had mentioned I think I'd reached out to someone at the stencil place, the Royal Design Studios, telling them that, hey, how do I clean these things? And so what they suggested is get some Simple Green. I'll leave a link down below. Simple Green is amazing. Use a bathtub if you have one. Hopefully you have one. Not everybody has bathtubs anymore. Some people just have standing showers. Fill it up with some warm soapy water, or not warm soapy water, but you can put warm and soapy water, but you also want to put in some Simple Green. And if you leave it soak overnight and then come back with like a bristled brush or scrub brush, it will come off. But here's the thing. You got to make sure all that paint, all those like peeling paint pieces, don't go down your drain. You don't want that stuff clogging your drain. So the other day when I was cleaning this up, it was literally right after I was done. Like I didn't let it sit overnight or anything. It was still a nightmare to clean up. And I think I even got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm done with this. I'll finish this tomorrow. Let me just go soak this thing and I'll just finish peeling the paint off. It does come off pretty easily, but if you've got a stencil that has a lot of detail and really skinny parts, like the one I'm using for this pegboard, it can be a lot. So you're going to want to use like maybe an old toothbrush or maybe like a scrub brush and let it soak, and you'll start seeing the paint bubbling up, and then just start scraping it off. But you're going to want to make sure that you're catching that paint in some sort of like a mesh drain thing insert, or if you're doing it in a sink so that stuff doesn't go down your drain. So that's the only thing that I hate about stencils. It's just cleaning them is just, and if you don't clean them, it just builds up, and then you start getting a really sloppy edge. So don't let that happen. I had actually let that happen and started noticing that my favorite damask floral stencil just wasn't working very well. So I had to soak it overnight, clean it thoroughly. And like I said, even the chalk paint, it was hard to get that chalk paint off. So don't let things set for too long. Now, when you're done washing them, you want to store your stencils flat, or you can gently clip them and hang them up. But you don't want to be like me and roll them up and put them in the garage. You want them to last. So you got to take care of it. All right. So that's everything I have for you regarding stencils. And I think, again, if you purchase some that are going to last, you can just use them over and over and over. And don't worry about using the same stencil everywhere. If you find one that you absolutely love, that's okay. Do your drawers, do a wall, do some, like some fabric and make some no-sew pillows, right? Like, I will leave a link down below because I think this would be a great project, like stenciling onto some fabric and then making some no-sew pillows. So you can do this and it can be amazing. You can create all kinds of things. So I want to hear from you. Do you like to stencil? Do you have some stencils that are your favorites? Do you invest in stencils? Send me an email. Let me know, serena@thriftdiving.com. You can also reach me on, I'm not really on Twitter that much, but if you want, you can send me a message on Twitter. Instagram, I will see your messages. I'm not super active on Instagram, but I do go in there at least once or twice a week, and I will see all your messages and respond to them. Facebook, I'm not as responsive to messages there. I don't know why, but Instagram and email is definitely how you can hit me up. So let me know, are you using stencils? Like, do you like using stencils, and do you also hate cleaning them? Or do you even clean them? Are you lazy like me and you left your stencils just get gunked up? I don't do that anymore. I'm like, I love this stencil and we're going to make sure that we are taking care of this stencil. Okay, guys, we will see you next week. I'm not sure what we're going to be talking about next week, but, and I forgot to tell you, yes, you can find me at Thrift Diving on Instagram. But next week, I'm not sure what we're going to be talking about, but we're going to talk about whatever it is that I'm working on for the week, and we're going to talk about it right here at Thrift Diving. I will see you next podcast.